He argued that if the clergy has a spiritual mission, it did not need temporal property, which could be put at the disposal of the nation, which had the consequences of churches being appropriated in some instances. On 2 November 1789, the property of the church was seized by the state. In February 1790, religious orders were suppressed, and in July 1790, the clergy was brought under government control. This heavy-handedness should be understood as a reaction to centuries of monarchical and church oppression. A decree of 1793 made primary education free, secular and compulsory. The positive achievements of the revolution were undermined when Napoleon became Premier Consul in 1801. Using religion as a distraction from politics, a concordat was reached with the Vatican. The role of the Catholic faith as the majority religion of France was restored, but the appointment of bishops was kept in the hands of the state. In 1814, Catholicism became the state religion, but in 1833, public education commences, undermining the authority of the church. An instructive program shown recently on SBS television in Australia, which you may have seen here, Secrets of the Inquisition, detailed how Napoleon had the secret files of the 600-year-long Inquisition brought from the Vatican to Paris, and at one stage had the Pope arrested. In 1881, public education was further developed in France, following the work of Jules Ferry, who said in 1883, "The first goal of the law is to separate school and church, to assure freedom of conscience for both masters and pupils, to make a distinction between two domains too long confused, that of beliefs, which are personal, free and variable, and that of knowledge, which is common and essential to all." In this respect, the critical document of the revolution is the rights of man and the citizen. Article 10 of the rights of man and the citizen states, "No one shall be harassed on account of his opinions, including his religious opinions, provided their manifestation does not disturb public order established by law." This is the first modern statement of the primacy of conscience. Rouquette remarks that this idea, the primacy of conscience, was bitterly opposed by the majority of the clergy, for it is a point of departure for the idea of secularism. Committed clergy must oppose secularism, for to agree to it is to agree to the possibility that their belief system is only one of many and could be wrong. In other words, as noted, secularism creates the democratic playing field of ideas where an individual is free to choose a faith or a belief. Committed religionists see no point to a debate about this because they are certain they are right. It follows committed religionists are theocrats and not democrats. For example, in one of its own publications referring to the government of the Vatican, it has openly declared that the form of government that rules the Vatican is that of an elected, absolute and theocratic monarchy. It is the pontiff who exercises legislative, executive and judicial power through delegates. In the 1890s, France moved closer to formal separation. The 1894 Dreyfus affair ended any form of compromise with the church, which was openly anti-Semitic. The church has a newspaper even to this day called La Croix, and in La Croix the church boasted of the fact that it was anti-Semitic. In 1901, an associations law provided that religious organisations could exist in France with government authorisation. After the formal separation of church and state in 1905, the government took responsibility for the upkeep of churches before that date, many of them historical monuments. After that date, the churches would be responsible for their financing of any new churches constructed, although I understand that regulation has been breached. Article 1 of the 1905 law guarantees the free exercise of religion. In this way, France relegated religion to the private sphere. Article 2 states that the Republic does not recognise, nor funds, nor subsidises any religion. In principle, the churches are not recognised as public institutions. But Article 2 cannot be taken at face value, as there have been qualifications, especially under the Vichy regime during the Second World War, that have, to all intents and purposes, totally compromised Article 2. Just over a week ago, on 9 December, our French colleagues held a meeting at the Great Hall in Paris to hear the results of nationwide surveys into state expenditures in favour of religion, mainly the Catholic supernatural charity. They reported that a staggering 10 billion euros is paid by the French state, its municipalities, regions and local authorities to the churches in flagrant breach of Article 2. This information will undoubtedly be the catalyst for future reform, and I'll return to that point at the end. Article 3 of the 1905 legislation socialised all religious property built or acquired before 1905 as mentioned, confirming a law made after the Revolution in 1789. According to a French author writing in 1989, whose information is clearly wrong, the changes brought about by separation were supposed to be that various forms of state funding of religion was to be abolished. Ministers of religion were no longer considered to be working for the interests of the state as if they were public servants, and their salaries were cut, becoming the responsibility of their faith. Parliamentary grants to churches were supposed to disappear from the state's budget. The majority religions were considered to be on the same level as any other minority religion. But in the light of the information concerning the huge sums still paid to the Catholic supernatural charity, that is clearly not so. The cutting of salaries from clergy was supposedly a huge saving for the state, but it was offset by the maintenance of the costs involved in maintaining churches built before 1905. Also, importantly in the wash, churches remained exempt from income tax, and Alsace-Lorraine, the region in the east of France, remains exempted from the 1905 legislation, and clerics there are still paid by the French government. Subsequently, under Article 4, religious groups are characterised as associations cultuelles, associations to further the cause of religion. In principle, they are subject to financial disclosure requirements, and they must exist for a purpose other than making a profit. Religious groups that apply to their local government, la commune, to be recognised as an association, and there are 36,000 communes in France. The association can be rejected if their aims are antisocial or they are openly venal in the pursuit of money. If associations are not recognised, they are subject to 60% taxation on their income. Clearly, that qualification can be taken with a grain of salt with this latest information. Contrary to most countries, France has established the Mission Interministérielle de lutte contre les sectes, which means the interministerial mission for the struggle or the battle against cults, answerable to the Prime Minister. France thus recognises significant human rights abuses are committed by what Anglophiles call cults and seeks to do something about them. With respect to education, a recent report commented that in return for state funding 80% of the costs, schools run by a religion must teach the national curriculum and cannot bar students because of their faith. Religious instruction must be minimal. There are around 900 such schools in the country. The 80% figure here may not be strictly accurate. The Debray Law of 1959 agreed to pay teachers' wages in private schools and 10% of their other expenses. These 900 or so religious schools represent approximately 15% of pupils in primary education in France and 20% in secondary education. There is opposition by French secularists to what they perceive to be the creeping agenda of the churches, particularly with respect to religious education in schools, openly contesting the 1905 law. Charity and other laws favouring religious organisations, contrary to the purpose of the 1905 legislation, have subsequently been enacted. Australia, on the other hand, has inherited the legal traditions of the constitutional monarchy of Britain, as has, of course, New Zealand, where there is no separation of church and state. Even if some of the drafters of the 1901 Australian Constitution wanted to be even-handed, they did not have the French 1905 law before them. They did not recognise the principal importance, as argued at the start, that all ideas should be treated equally, that a neutral secular republic with a formal separation of church and state, the first separation of powers, is a prerequisite for democracy. Also, as the French only partly recognised, the principle extends to a complete reconsideration of the property and taxation position of churches within a democratic state. The early French willingness to put